Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, is your doctor killing you? We are about to talk about antibiotics and the evolution of the superbug. And remember that we are on YouTube right now. So if you want to comment on this show, you can watch along and talk to us at the same time.
And I'm Ahmed Shabuddin. I'll be bringing your comments directly to our guests today. And we are going to be asking, what is the overprescription of antibiotics, the lack of access to the right drugs, and even the meat you eat actually doing to your immune system? Well, my colleagues at AJ Plus explain.
We risk being in a post-antibiotic world. It is the end of the road for antibiotics unless we act urgently.
Life before antibiotics was grim. People died because of some of the most basic illnesses, and childhood mortality numbers were sky high. But that changed in 1928 with arguably one of the most important developments in modern medicine. When Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, he knew he was saving millions of lives from infections that just a few years earlier would have been fatal. He predicted that organisms would become penicillin resistant. And a little more than a decade later, researchers found that bacteria had already developed resistance to the drug. Now, almost a century later, antibiotic-resistant infections kill more than 20,000 people a year in just the US and UK, and more than 700,000 annually around the world. So, how did we get from miracle drug to superbug? Here's what happened.
Antibiotics are often prescribed unnecessarily for infections that are likely to go away without treatment. In many countries, antibiotics are also sold over the counter without a prescription from the doctor. At the same time, in many low-income countries, lack of access to antibiotics actually causes more deaths than resistance. Multi-drug-resistant bacteria spread within hospitals as a result of poor infection control, and also between people in the community. Bacteria know no boundaries, and extensive international travel and trade help resistance to spread from continent to continent. Antibiotic resistance does not only affect humans, but also the health of animals and the environment. It is all connected.
Joining us now in New Delhi, India, Dr. Sara Iqbal is a scientist and public engagement officer at the Wellcome Trust Charitable Foundation. In Uppsala, Sweden, Helle Agard is a policy advisor at REACT, a network dedicated to antibiotic resistance. In Atlanta, Maren McKenna is a journalist and author of Big Chicken, a book about the history of antibiotic use in agriculture. And in New York, Dr. Kent Sepkowitz, an infectious disease specialist at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and is a professor of medicine and infectious disease at Weill Cornell Medical College. Thank you all for being here.
So hello, experts. I'm going to get you to work for us straight away. I want you to tell us each one thing about the superbug that most people don't know. Dr. Kent?
The superbug is very alarming, but I would say that it is not at an apocalyptic point as is being advertised. It's tenacious. We've seen it for decades, but my day-to-day life demonstrates that it's not, the sky is not about to fall.
Helle?
Yeah, so I would make the point that was also made in the video you just showed, that we still need to remember that many more people still die from the lack of access to antibiotics than from resistance. And so even though resistance is a massive threat that we're standing in front of, the interventions and the solutions that we need to devise really need to be balanced against the need to ensure that people have improved access to antibiotics, in particular in low and middle income countries.
Mm-hmm. Maren, we've heard this phrase superbug many times. We've read in headlines and we've seen on TV. One thing that you find the general public do not understand about the superbug is what?
I think that people don't understand that it's not that they themselves are resistant, which is what you often hear people say, but rather that bacteria are resistant. And the reason that's so important is that if people think that they themselves have somehow become resistant, they're likely to stop taking their antibiotics early or to not take antibiotics at all, which might accidentally make things worse.
Dr. Sarah, this is your job. You teach people about superbugs. What's lesson 101? What is it?
Lesson 101 would be that antibiotic resistance doesn't mean that our body has become resistant to antibiotics. It means the bacteria has become resistant to antibiotics. So what we need to understand is the mechanism by which the bacteria is becoming resistant, and that it's not unnatural. It's, like Doctor said in the beginning, it is a natural phenomena exhibited by bacteria, by living species, and that is they undergo genetic changes, throughout their lifetime. So it is natural. The antibiotic resistance has become worrying because of many reasons that I'm hoping to discuss today in this discussion.
Well, Sarah, we have another Sarah Iqbal, coincidentally, who chimed in with what she thinks is the main problem. I know you know her. She told us that it all begins with excessive consumption of antibiotics. A large fraction of antibiotics is not broken down by the body and released in the feces. Obviously, one specific situation there. But Dr. Kent, when we look at kind of this being a macro problem, it's been around for a while, of course, but it seems like the alarm bells are kind of ringing louder than ever. Ryan McNeil also chimed in saying, antibiotic resistance infections were declared an urgent public health threat more than 15 years ago, but there are still dangerous flaws in how the U.S. specifically tracks and responds to outbreaks of superbugs. Is that the crux of the problem, the reporting and the lack of kind of oversight?
No, I think that this is an inevitability, that the more sick people there are in hospitals, the more antibiotics they're going to get. The more antibiotics they're going to get necessarily by simple biology, the more resistance we're going to see. So as we get better at keeping people alive longer, they will be exposed to a lot more antibiotics and we're going to see resistance. Parallel to that is a very stupid use of antibiotics for all sorts of things, including colds, aches and pains, keeping chickens alive, other things. And that is much more preventable, but I don't think those are the issues that are really driving the real force of this, which is an inevitable consequence of the progress we've made in
but I think we need
people
to
alive.
talk to. We should respond to what that person asked on Twitter, which was that, do we have adequate tracking of superbugs? And the answer is no. The reason that colistin-resistant bacteria were found in the first place in China was because specific researchers were looking for them. It wasn't because of any kind of national tracking program. And we need so many more national tracking programs in the developing world and also here in the United States to spot superbugs faster when they emerge.
I would quibble with that certainly for the United States, where I think we do a good job of tracking and never a perfect job. Totally in agreement that in China and in other countries, if they do know, they're not sharing it with us, and that's a big quandary for us.
Dr. Zara?
But I do think that there's also a point in maybe remembering that the last class of antibiotic that was actually discovered in 1987. That's a long time ago, and since then we've really seen a lot of most of the pharmaceutical industry sort of retreat from that area of R&D. So what we're facing today, and the reason why it's also becoming such an urgent issue, is we are running out of medicines in our medicines cabinet to treat common infections, and if we look at the pipeline, I mean, there's really not much promising there, and so it's likely that a new drug will be 10 years away from coming to the market. So that's obviously also
the pipeline stinks. The pipeline stinks, and it's been horrible for a while, and it's very depressing that the drug companies don't see this as something that they want to go after. There's no defense of that.
Let me just show you something. Helle, you told us about the last time antibiotic was developed, 1987, on REACT's website. Look at all the different ways that antibiotics are used, starting at blood infections, going all the way up here through cancer treatment. So if the last antibiotic was developed in 1987, but we use it for all modern medicine, why would development stop? Be direct, be candid. Why are we not seeing new antibiotics? Go there.
So I would say there are two main reasons for that. One is that I think all the low-hanging fruits have been picked, and what we're looking at now is scientifically a lot more difficult today to develop new drugs and discover new mechanisms of action in antibiotics that work against the most resistant bacteria out there. But the other side of the story is also that antibiotics are just not as economically lucrative for the pharmaceutical industry to invest in. I mean, you're going to be spending. Well, I mean, you're going to be taking drugs for non-communicable diseases or lifestyle diseases, perhaps for the rest of your life. Whereas an antibiotic, you only really take it for a short period of time. And so, I mean, we see that there just is a market failure for new antibiotics, and that urgently needs to be addressed by governments and funders alike, and really replenish. I mean, we need urgent replenishment of the antibiotic pipeline as it stands, and that requires radical changes to the research and development model that we're relying on drug development for today.
Well, I see both the doctors nodding as you're speaking, which I think is probably a good sign that what you're saying makes sense. But I want to chime in. And maybe I'll come to you, Dr. Sarah. Dr. Joseph Fair on Twitter says, antibiotics revolutionized healthcare. Before post-op infections killed millions. Now we take them for granted. We've created our own worst enemies. So obviously in that historical context, he's outlining, maybe how a solution became a problem. But Ryan McNeil, who we heard from earlier, and it seemed as though Dr. Kent was agreeing with, he now is saying, we found a system, referring to that system of reporting we were talking about that Dr. Kent suggests is better handled here in America than elsewhere. He says, we found a system that often seems more concerned with protecting the reputations of healthcare facilities than informing patients. Is it that also compounded by this kind of capitalist industry? Is that hurting, and is that as big a problem as we kind of referred to?
It's definitely a very big problem, and I think before I talk about the drug discovery pipeline, I think I would like to put in an Indian perspective, and which is that, as you know, that India consumes highest amount of antibiotics in the world. We also have close to 57,000 young babies dying every year. So it is a huge problem, and we can't, even if monitoring in one country is good, if surveillance in one country is good, we can't forget that we're we're interconnected today, more than ever before. And if the over-the-counter consumption or prescription of antibiotics in India is a regular affair. Mm-hmm. I can go to any pharmacy in India and I can buy an antibiotic. Right. I don't need a prescription.
Any antibiotic that you want, you can get by just walking up to a little chemist in India.
That's right.
All right, let me ask you this, because Dr. Kent described it as stupid use of antibiotics. So let's address this stupid use, Dr. Sarah. Mm-hmm. Tell us all the things that you do not need antibiotics for, that people will go and either ask their doctor or buy over the counter. Let's do it now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So to begin with, if you have a sore throat, which is generally caused by viruses and not by bacterial infections.
Yes.
So most of the upper respiratory diseases.
But Dr. Sarah, it really hurts me. Just write me a prescription for an antibiotic. You would say what?
I would say, please tell me how you're feeling. Unfortunately, I'm not the doctor, so I would leave that to Dr. Kent to comment on.
All right, so sore throat. Do not get antibiotics for a sore throat. Dr. Sarah, continue. We want a good list here. What else?
Yep. For diarrhea, so a lot of people in India also take antibiotics for diarrhea. And those are the two main, I think, I would say, at least around me, my families and my family and friends consume antibiotics at the drop of a hat when they have cold, without really trying to find out why,
cough,
what has
cough,
caused
cough,
that.
and phlegm.
Coughs, cold, diarrhea. Actually, while we're on the subject of poop, Dr. Sarah, poop is really important. Poop is one of the reasons in developing countries why superbugs are developing. Can you make that connection for us?
Yes, totally. I mean, I can talk about India, where we don't have a very robust public health system. We don't have, a very good sanitation here, and that, and of course, not very tightly regulated, sewage systems. So that leads to a lot of resistant bacteria out in the environment, and which reaches human beings and animals quite easily. And of course, as you know, India has 1.3 billion people, so we're living quite close to each other. So, and also very closely with animals. If because of poor sanitation, these resistant bacteria find a very easy route to our guts and to our body.
So if you look at sanitation issues in the developing world, and you worked on that, I know India is trying really hard to stop open defecation. That
right.
helps with how resistant bacteria or antibiotics are. That's one of the key issues. Dr. Kent, you're nodding. Dr. Sarah, you're nodding. Okay, interesting.
Oh, sure.
Well, when we sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but it's funny because a lot of the comments are coming about India with this problem, and we have Akarsh Chowdhury here saying stricter regulation of prescribing antibiotics here in India. They hand out antibiotics like Halloween candy. So I see Dr. Sarah nodding. Sarah, you're nodding there,
unfortunately,
laughing.
Yes.
So I guess confirming that reality. But I also
it's a sad laughter. There's a lot of sadness hidden behind that laughter.
No, of course, and I understand.
That's true.
And I understand that that's true. And also when you look to solutions, we were just talking about feces, the problem that poses specifically for India. We actually had a video comment that came in about this from Jugsharan Singh Verdi, kind of talking about efficient treatment options. I want to get your thoughts on this. Take a listen.
Sewage treatment plants receive waste from a variety of sources, like human urban waste, hospital effluents, agriculture runoff, and waste from pharmaceutical industries. And we know that these are all full of microbes, and they may carry a lot of antibiotic resistance. So it's very important that our sewage treatment plants must be running at full capacity and running very efficiently, as a result of which, to some extent, they can play their role in alleviating the problem of antimicrobial resistance.
So, Dr. Sarah, is that a good solution? And Dr. Ken, I'd love your thoughts as well afterwards.
I'll let Sarah go.
The expert has spoken, so I can't help but agree with him. That is needed. I think we almost have no strict regulations around the affluents that reach our rivers and water bodies and the environment in general. So we definitely need stricter regulations there if we want to tackle antibiotic resistance in India.
But I
want to come in here and maybe also, sorry, go ahead.
Maybe Dr. Kent, because obviously that's not a problem that faces us here in America, as you were referring to, perhaps only in Puerto Rico now, where they're dealing with, of course, sewage problems of their own. But is that, do you think, in the spectrum of all the problems, is that a big one?
I think over-the-counter purchase, which is a complicated issue because it's over-the-counter for the convenience and the cost savings for the patient. There is an advantage to the patient to being able to buy it. I think that's gargantuan, and I think the other is the plumbing issues.
So if we keep talking about poop,
yes.
I think it's really important that we look at the issue of the degree to which we give antibiotics to animals. So globally, twice as many antibiotics go into animals as into humans, and there are resistant bacteria present.
One more time, because I feel this is like a mind-blown moment. So in the world, who gets the most antibiotics?
Animals, livestock get on average twice as many antibiotics as humans do by volume. In some countries, including here in the United States, much higher than that. And so in the same way that we're talking about resistant bacteria being part of sewage, they are also part of animal manure, which contaminates the environment, which is used as fertilizer, which distributes antibiotic-resistant bacteria through the environment in a way that is not well tracked. And it's a part of the issue that as we're talking about these very, very serious problems in the developing world, really doesn't get enough attention because, of course, appetites for meat are rising in the developing world, which pushes the use of even more antibiotics to produce more livestock.
Marion, you wrote a whole book about this. Let me just show it to everybody so they can see what you were talking about here. Big Chicken, the incredible story of how antibiotics created modern agriculture and changed the way the world eats. If this is an issue in terms of creating superbugs or contributing to the superbug problem, what's your solution?
So where we need to get to is, so antibiotics are used in meat animals to increase their growth, to protect them against the conditions that they're held in, and also a small percentage are used to treat infections. And what we should be doing is reducing the use as much as possible to just treating infections. That's really challenging because developing economies want to buy more and more meat. Understandably, their citizens want to eat meat, but we have to help coach those economies how to grow meat animals without overusing antibiotics in the way that the West taught them to do.
Well, Dr. Kent, when you hear that, I mean, I know you're maybe a bit skeptical about how big a role that plays in actually creating this problem, but our community is referencing a lot of different things. Some of them agree with Marion. I want to just talk you through a couple, get your quick reactions. Faisal Ali saying antibiotic resistance can be avoided. Lack of funding and research is alarming. Simple tactics can be implemented to combat this issue. So outlining lack of funding and research. We also have her saying it's also important to educate the public, even about basic things like hand washing, which my aunt and several family members would agree with, even though, you know, I could learn from that. But in all seriousness, Trinidad Jade saying what she's observed, it's about a cultural issue, that antibiotics have become so trendy that patients expect it and pressure the doctors. Out of those three, I see some nods amongst the panel. Dr. Kent, which is the most important?
I think in the United States and in Western countries, Western Europe, I think it's the pressure on the doctor to prescribe, that's a relationship between the doctor and the patient. The doctor doesn't want to put tension into the relationship. They give up too easily. The argument is a very difficult argument with the patient, discussion.
Can you relate to that personally, doctor?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, when my kids used to get sick and I had to argue with myself about am I going to give my own kid antibiotics, it was a very difficult, you know, battle. I usually was able to talk myself off the ledge, but not always. It's very difficult. So the notion that we can just get doctors to behave is not gonna work.
Yes, Hele, go ahead.
No, but just what complicates this even more is also the fact that we don't really have very good tools to help us and help doctors in that situation. So we don't really have very good diagnostics, for instance, to differentiate between a bacterial infection and a virus. So, of course, I mean, we are mostly working from the perspective of low and middle-income countries. And there, I mean, before I joined REACT, I was working for a humanitarian organization. And, you know, doctors that are only seeing patients for, you know, a short period of time, patients that may have come from a long way to see a doctor and are just there, and you don't have the right tools to basically do an appropriate diagnosis of your patient, and those patients need to, you know, travel a long way back. You know, that's a situation where do you take the chance of not giving them antibiotics and they may end up, you know, even more sick because they did have a bacterial infection, or do you give them antibiotics? I mean, those are the real questions and the real dilemmas that doctors are facing around the world.
And to your point, I mean, it's difficult to know in that situation whether to give them or not. But I know that, you know, with the common cold, which Dr. Kent outlined earlier being a problem, my mom always says natural remedies are better. We also have Artemis saying that for almost everything, there's a natural remedy: bladder, kidney infections, to sleep problems. But it's tough, right? It's tough to know. I mean, we've discussed how difficult it is to decide what warrants turmeric and garlic and what warrants an antibiotic.
All right, thank you so much to our expert panel. We really appreciate you, Dr. Sarah, Hele, Marilyn, and Dr. Kent. We're at the end of this program, but our conversation always continues online. Just look out for the hashtag AJStream. See you next time.